Wilson. She is an LCSW, LCDC, and CSTAT, and she is a professional speaker, educator, workshop facilitator, certified sex addiction therapist, and trained EMDR therapist with years of experience in the field. She is in current private practices in Houston and Katy, Texas, and specializes in helping reduce symptoms of panic attacks, past traumas, PTSD, phobia, depression, grief, severe anxiety, substance abuse addictions, process addictions, and other debilitating mental challenges. I believe prolonged stress can result in complex trauma symptoms, and treatment should address the whole person and not just one symptom. Here's Dee.
Thank you. Okay, I want to just get a little bit of an idea of who's present. How many of you are therapists, psychotherapists? Just raise your hand. Okay, that's a good number. Why this topic? I'm going to go into that in a lot more detail as we move further down the slides. One of the reasons, though, why I chose to start specializing in narcissistic abuse is because as I was treating clients, they would go so far and then they seem to go right back. And they go so far, they get so, and primarily we may be treating for love addiction or for codependency. And they go so far and then they seem to just go right back to where they were before. It's as if they haven't developed any insight or any awareness or anything, like starting over. And then I start noticing a pattern. They would refer to a mother that was a narcissist or a partner that was a narcissist. And then I started looking into that, and then the light bulb went off, and I thought, there is a difference. There is a difference. And so I kind of modified my treatment model to include that. So with the person looking at their experiences and viewing their experiences, and me as a professional doing the same thing through the lens of narcissism, just pretty much transformed my practice. So I wanted to be sure to pass that along to others. I remember at a treatment center, sometimes I consult with therapists in treatment centers, and I remember a person called and said, I don't know that she ever heard me talk about narcissism, I don't know, this was years ago, and she said, I have a narcissist in my group, and this would have been an alcoholic or drug addict, and she said, he's a narcissist, and I don't know how to deal with him, I don't know how to work with him. And I said, well, I'm going to put that question out to you all. What would you say? What are you doing when you run across someone that may be a narcissist? Any strategies for a narcissist? First of all, they don't usually try to get help. But if they did, maybe 1%. If you were, you may run across the traits. How are you dealing with that? How are you addressing that?
Maybe using the people and things they care about as leverage. Like
using people they care about as
leverage.
Because
if you don't, you're going to lose your marriage. Or
yeah, that tend to be what if anything motivates them is because they may not want to lose something. Yeah. Anybody else? How are you working with them? They challenge you a lot, and they will try to control the room and things like that. So I told her, which was not good advice, but I didn't know. I said, well, they like to get their ego stroked, and they like compliments, and they like attention. So give it to them. And that was not the good feedback. I don't know what happened with that. She never communicated with me again. So I want to learn more about it. So we're going to talk a little bit about PTSD because the narcissistic survivors have PTSD type of symptoms a lot of times. Not all of them, but many have some sort of traumatic type of symptoms. So we'll talk about that as well. Trauma bonds in the brain. This particular presentation is a trauma bonds and narcissistic abuse presentation. So I've modified it to just focus on the narcissism and primarily the narcissistic abuse because the other one is so long, and matter of fact, it's a 2-day workshop. So some of these slides you might see me skip through, and the PTSD, the trauma bonds, those are some slides that I might go through pretty quickly. Trauma bonds, here's another question. What are they? Any of you use that term or that phrase, or what do you think that might mean? Trauma bonds.
triggers that connect to the actual episode that's inflicted trauma.
Triggers that might, like triggers of trauma?
Yeah, triggers that are associated with that as a trauma
Mm-hmm.
that
Okay, automatically connected. Anyone else? Trauma bonds?
Maybe something similar with complex trauma, how they're interrelated or connected.
Complex trauma, like complex PTSD. In this particular model, a trauma bond is where you have a person that's maybe abused or a victim, so to speak, and they are bonded with this victimizer. You heard of Stockholm syndrome? It's like that. And you know, everybody's like, well, you see what this person is doing. Last week you were in the ER, you know, because of this. You've spent a year, 2 years, 5 years going through this abuse over and over and over again. And everybody can pretty much see what's going on, but that person might say something like, but I love them, but I care, but it's not so bad. And they may even defend the person. Stockholm Syndrome was in a town called Stockholm, and I think I'm pronouncing it right, Stockholm, something like that. There were some people that were hostages, they were taken hostage, and then the women fell in love with some of the women fell in love with the hostage takers. And so then they start trying to defend them and things like that. So whenever there's negative activity, a negative experience creates this activity in the brain, and it's stronger than if there's a positive experience. You know, they've scanned this and everything by neurologically, it's been proven scientifically. So we are drawn to the negative. That's why, you know, the ratings on television go up with the negative than the positive. Sometimes we're like, why don't they show more positive on TV? Well, it's not going to get the ratings. It's not exciting the brain as much as a negative experience or a negative reaction. So it's the same thing in relationships and in our day-to-day experiences. It's so much easier to be drawn in the gossip, right? That gossip, the adrenaline gets going, than to interrupt that process. So trauma bonds, we get really bonded with another person through drama, so to speak.
Do you offer that workshop?
Yes, right now I don't have anything. I have a Trauma Bonds 1 and a Trauma Bonds 2, and I don't have anything scheduled. I did a couple of them this year. I don't have anything scheduled for next year, but I will. I'll also, if you signed in, I'll have you on my distribution list where you'll see my announcements and things like that. Attachment, there's attachment theory. That's kind of what's behind that attachment and that magnetism between that victim and that victimizer is attachment theory. Attachment starts in the womb when a child, and you know, there are studies these days, we're all pretty fairly familiar that child is kind of aware of what's going on when in the outside world. That child does have a connection to mom's feelings, mom's experiences, and noises and things like that that's going on the outside world. There are gadgets. I never remember the name of it. Somebody here might know. There are gadgets where you put on your belly. The woman, the pregnant woman puts on her belly, and it's to help the child. Like music. Anybody know what that is? Anyway, there's a thing that it's supposed to help the baby calm, you know, and things like that, so the baby won't be so scared or anxious when they come out into the world. Sometimes it's like, I ain't going out there. So there's like treatment for the embryo. The embryo is beginning to bond with mom. Mom is their first attachment, and then when they come out, they may bond with dad. They will need to bond with a male as well, because there are parts in the brain that helps a person feel secure, that helps a baby feel secure, and male and female activates two different parts of the brain. So there are certain things that can come from a male that doesn't come from a female, and then vice versa. So feeling secure and safe in the world starts when we were really little, and that security phenomena is being developed until about the age 2 or 3 years old. Then after that, it's done. Whether it's a secure attachment or an insecure attachment, it's done. And so that's going to determine how that person interacts and attach to people throughout their life. As a person that wants to heal and in recovery, when they show up in a therapist's office, They may not develop a secure attachment, that's already done, but what they can do, what your clients can do is develop a learned secure attachment. So they can still have healthy interactions and relationships with people. That's called attachment theory. Identify narcissists, we're gonna go through that some. I'm gonna spend some time on that, but I wanna spend more time on the narcissistic abuse because that's what will show up in front of you are the people that's been abused by narcissists. Healing strategies, we're gonna talk about that and then we'll have to go through questions. You have a questionnaire. You have a questionnaire in front of you, don't you? It says, what do you know? I think I have all the questions here. What is a narcissist? Let's have someone answer that question. What's a narcissist?
It's a person who thinks everything's about them, everything has to do with them.
Everything has to do with them. They think that everything has to do with them. Anything else? What's a narcissist?
They don't understand anyone else's point of view.
They don't understand anyone else's point of view. Yeah. Anything else?
They need to be in control.
They need to be in control. They're pretty grandiose. They're self-centered. They are constantly seeking validation. They live on validation. They live on it. So.
And they think they're smarter than everyone else.
They're smarter. They're superior than everyone else. If you're a human being, they're smarter than you. They know everything. They're usually pretty. There are different levels, and I'm going to talk about that. The ones at what I'm going to call the master level, like the top one, the strongest one at the top of the spectrum, are usually pretty successful because they get highly focused, super focused on a goal, and they don't care who they hurt, they don't care what happened, they don't care about casualties, and they're going to get that goal, period, and there is no exceptions. What's the difference between a narcissism and a self-centeredness? Self-centered is one of the traits of a narcissist. What's the difference though? Because there are some people that might be self-centered, we might identify them as self-absorbed, but they're not really narcissists.
Yeah, I was thinking that narcissism is more like a personality disorder.
Well, it's a personality disorder.
And self-centeredness is a behavior that any of us can
Any of us.
demonstrate at different times, but
Yeah.
might not be completely.
Yeah, and we all might seem selfish sometimes. Yeah. Anyone else? Difference between?
Empathy.
Empathy would be the primary thing. A person, most of us know how to be empathetic. Not a narcissist. It doesn't happen. If it didn't happen by like that age of 4 or 5 years old, it's not going to happen. They do not have the capacity for empathy. So I'll talk about that some. What's another one? Can narcissists feel emotions? Some people are on the understanding that they can't feel any emotions because kind of like a psychopath is the one that doesn't feel anything. But a narcissist has a few, and I'll talk about those as well. Do they care about others? Because they have a lot of casualties in their path. Yeah, you look back and there's a lot of bodies in their path. They've hurt a lot of people. Do you think they care?
I think only insofar as they affect them.
As long as it affects
Right, like, I
the
care
things
about
that
this
affect
person.
them is what they care about.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's see, can they change? I remember back, I think this was during the DSM-3 days where they were saying when it comes to a personality, y'all remember that? When it comes to a personality disorder, they can't change. And if I'm not mistaken, they were like, there's just nothing you can do. Isn't that what they said? There's nothing you can really do about a person that has a personality disorder. That's kind of changed. Narcissists, that's kind of changed. But narcissists is different. I'll talk a little bit about that. You want to say
I
something?
was just thinking it's probably one of those things that underlying, maybe not a change in terms of the tendency, but maybe if there can be any self-awareness developed that you could do some behavioral work. and change
Yeah,
behavior.
exactly. Yeah, there could be some behavioral change
What is
from self-awareness through a lot of work. There's a guy called, this is a really good resource if you want to know more about this, HG Tudor, Tudor. He's under the sky. He's anonymous. He has a podcast and a Facebook page and a series of YouTube videos called what are they called? It'll come to me. Knowing the Narcissist. He is a master narcissist, and he's a master narcissist that's gone to treatment and is very, very self-aware. He's written books about it. What I really love about him is he gives you a glimpse into the actual brain. He's not somebody talking about narcissism. He is a narcissist, and he's a master narcissist. So he's been my number one resource because he knows it, because I don't think like most people don't think like they do, and we'd be shocked. And some of that's going to be in my video if we knew what goes on inside the mind of a narcissist. Let's see what else. Are there different types of narcissists? Yes, I talked about that. I'm going to talk about 3 different types. And then what is an empath? What's an empath? That's kind of a name that's kind of growing popularity.
An empath is a person who's very empathetic, total opposite of the narcissist.
Total opposite of the narcissist, yeah. An empath might draw a narcissist in their lives. They oftentimes will have one somewhere, either in their past as a parent or sibling or a partner or a friend. That's up. An empath tend to draw those into their lives, and narcissists tend to be drawn to empaths as well. So empath has this unlimited amount of empathy. No matter what is done, they have a reason why that was done. Well, this person did this over here, and then you may be talking about a murder on television, on the news. Well, maybe they, blah, blah, blah. So an empath. So I'll talk about that a little bit as well. That tend to be the primary victim of a narcissist. So I talked a little bit about the brain earlier. This is the limbic system, and this is the part of the brain where survival lives. The fight or flight or freeze reaction is in this part. It's being triggered from this part of the brain. When you see a developing embryo, the first time you see it, like on a ultrasound or something, you see a little dot, and then you see a little line that looks like a tail. That little tail on that embryo that's really, really little is the brain stem, and that little dot that you see that starts growing is the amygdala, which is this right here. It's about, in a normal, a regular, healthy person, it's about the size of an almond. In people that have gone through things like addictions or some sort of severe trauma, it's going to be a little bit larger. So as a result, it's going to overreact. The amygdala is that part of the body that sends a survival signal to all the other parts of the body. Let's say you go home and you put your key in the door, and the door comes open and nobody's supposed to be there. What's going to happen? What's going to automatically happen in your body when you start opening? It's like, wait a minute.
A rush of adrenaline.
Say it again.
A rush of adrenaline.
A rush of adrenaline. The heart is going to start beating. The temperature is going to go up. The fight or flight or freeze is going to be activated. It just depends on what your body tends to do. Some people freeze. In the movies, you're like, run, and they freeze. That's a survival mechanism in the brain, and it's unconscious. Like the possum that plays dead, and then you leave it on, it gets up and run away, That's a survival thing that the brain will automatically do. It will shut things down. A person can live under, let's say, a disaster. You've heard of buildings fall on a person, and they're under that for a long time. No food, no drinks, no liquid. And then, the doctors wonder, how did they survive? How are they okay when they're supposed to have died after this long of no food and no water? It was this amygdala that kicked in and said, you're going to survive. It can cause the body to kind of go into hibernation like a bear to preserve it. You may have heard of or some of you, it may have been you, like a petite woman is in an auto accident and the car's turned over and her baby is in that car, and she gets the superhuman strength to turn that car over and get her baby out. You heard of stories like that? We have the superhuman strength. Or if you're running a race and you're running from a bear, I know in my case a dog, you're gonna break records. You're gonna probably run faster than anybody in the world because the amygdala will kick in. And you notice how a person might have a major injury and they don't know it and they don't feel it. The adrenaline and everything will do that because the body goes into a survival mode. This shuts off. The only thing we need is those arms and those legs. Eyesight gets really, really clear, really, really keen. People that's been in auto accidents will say things kind of slow down. That's what this system will do. So that system says we're going to do whatever it takes for you to live. It doesn't care if it's good or bad, you're going to live. Well, this is also, so what happens when a person goes through a trauma, then this becomes hyperactive. It becomes hyperactive, so it sends off a false alarm. So the person thinks that they're, here's a real example of female walking in the mall and she sees a guy with a blue shirt, and then before you know it, she runs to the restroom and she's curled up behind in one of the stalls and she's shaking and shivering. Well, what happened is that that shirt triggered her to where she was reminded of a rape, and so she had a PTSD reaction. She had a flashback. So everything in her body, she knew here she was in the mall, and that she knew that with the frontal cortex here, the logical part, but everything else, the amygdala was saying danger, danger, danger. The siren went off, and then it sent all this message to the rest of her body, and she was like that and went into a freeze state. And so that's how powerful that amygdala is, and that's what's driving everything. And so when you're working with a person, and we're working on trauma, or even the experience with a narcissist, that in itself can create trauma, then this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a biological process, a neurological process, not just a psychological process. So I know a lot of my work includes physical type, like body work types of things, like mindfulness, EMDR, and things like that. Any questions about that part of the brain? Okay, I'm not going to go through this, but have any of you all heard of a strange situation? That's a video, that's a study. That's a study that where they study different types of attachment styles with a toddler. If mom leaves the room and the toddler securely bonded with mom, the baby is supposed to cry. If the baby doesn't cry and is completely oblivious that mom left the room and could care less, the baby would probably have an avoidant attachment style. That's how they will attach to people, is be really distant and afraid or not comfortable with getting close to a person. If the baby does cry and mom comes back, mom is supposed to console the baby and calm the baby down, so because the baby now feels safe. Because mom is the safe haven, they need to have that. That's what I meant up until the age of 2 or 3. They need to have this person that they have some sense of safety. But if the baby doesn't calm down, then let me go to this next slide. It's kind of there. If the baby isn't consolable and they just keep crying and mom is there, they probably develop more like what we call a disorganized attachment style, or a preoccupied anxious attachment style. Preoccupied means obsession. So when you have that person that's obsessing, which is very similar, these three, these are all really strong emotions here. This one, avoids emotions, they shut down. These three have these really strong, intense emotions. So when you're dealing with someone that's gone through this type of abuse, then you're working with their attachment style. So the treatment model for attachment theory is in order. You as a therapist, you're using yourself as treatment, the bond that you're developing with that person is extremely important, even more so when you have someone that's been abused like this, because they need to learn how secure attachment feels. And the number two thing that's even more important is that they develop relationships with other people that are comfortable bonding healthy. So they can have some sort of idea, some resemblance of how a healthy bond really feels. You know how drama queen, drama king and all that, they attach through that. You ever heard of somebody where they'll say, you know, when things are going fine, why did they throw this, you know, I call it like a hurricane. They have to create a hurricane, you know, when things are going okay, it's got to be like that. That's because that's when they feel alive. That's when they feel connected. This person would be more of the narcissist, and they're drawn to that. Why do y'all think that's so? Why would this person might be more flat and they avoid emotions? This isn't necessarily a narcissist, but this is where their attachment style lies. Why is that one drawn to that one? The one that's really anxious and nervous and obsessive and emotional, drawn to that person that's flat? That's a question. They can get this one can get more attention from that one. They do get a lot of attention from that, that's for sure. It does, will draw our attention to them. It kind of wakes them up. They're drawn to that liveliness. And they're drawn to that what appears to be in control, that very controlled, stable person. So they're drawn to one another, and that's kind of where trauma bonds come in as well. I'm gonna skip this one, I've gone through that one. What is trauma, direct or indirect? This is from the DSM-5. Direct or indirect exposure, memories, nightmares, flashbacks. You all are probably familiar with this, so I'm not gonna go through all of that. These are some of the traits, many of the traits that a person that's been abused by narcissism would look. And then there's shock trauma. Shock trauma is when something happens unexpectedly, like an auto accident or a suicide or that type of thing. So we weren't expecting it. So those are different types of trauma. This could also, what could also be under here, it's not necessarily PTSD, but I am glad the DSM-5 put the developmental trauma in there. I think it's more like one of those other codes. X code or V code? I always get them mixed up. What is it? V code, yeah. I think they have trauma. Yeah, they do. They have childhood trauma under the V codes, which we would go more into this long-term experience of trauma, developmental trauma, and that's what that narcissist tap into as well. That person's developmental trauma. If somebody's been married to a narcissist for 10, or they've been in a relationship with a narcissist 10 or 15 years. It's like there are some developmental things that were impacted as well, which there's probably a traumatic history if they were able to hang in there like that. This, what is a trauma bond? I talked about that, so I'm not going to go into that. This is a cycle of abuse. Some of you might feel familiar with it. There's tension. Then it happens, whatever it is happens, and then they get together. Here comes the flowers. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. I love you. I miss you. The cats miss you. The fish miss you. Whatever it takes to get that person back involved. And then they reconnect and then they calm down. One thing that I would put here, and is a lot of times this reconciliation is sex. You know, it's like we have this huge blow up. You ever heard of some people say, well, they will create this argument so that they could have make-up sex? We have sex, okay, we made up, everything's fine, calm, only for it to happen again, as if that's the remedy for resolving issues. Okay, so I'm going to go into this. A narcissistic personality disorder. What is a personality disorder? I'm going to put that question out. Personality disorder. How do we know we're dealing with that? Just guess. One of the most difficult, this is what we call cluster B. It's one of the most difficult persons to work with, probably in the DSM, is personality disorders. Okay, so usually with a personality, there's impaired functioning, and it usually goes, it's in different settings. So they have trouble with their relationships, they have trouble at work, maybe they have trouble at home with family. So a personality disorder, the person have trouble bonding. One way to look at it is they're always up here and other people are always down here. You know, so if you have a person with a borderline personality disorder, a narcissist personality, histrionic, they're telling you about how they're up here and the other person, and they live there. You know, conflict from this mindset is different than conflict from that mindset, where we're equal. Conflict from up here, there it's no matter what angle you put it out there. What if you about this? What about that? What about this? They cannot step into the other person's shoes. They cannot do what we call perspective taking. They can't do reality testing, that type of thing. They struggle with that.